All right, of course, in reaction pouring in, Bill Russell's family announcing today that Russell passed away peacefully at the age of 88 with his wife by his side. The Hall of Famer has embodied winning at every level. He was a two-time national champion in college and an 11-time NBA champion with the Celtics. We go on and on about his accolades, but it would obviously take the entire show. Some incredible Bill Russell stats out there. Meanwhile, again, reaction pouring in. Jason Tatum posted a picture of Russell in his Celtics uniform with "Thank you for everything, R.I.P. legend." And Michael Jordan, considered by many the greatest player in NBA history. If not Russell, then it's Jordan. He says Russell was a pioneer as a player, as a champion, and as the NBA's first black head coach, and as an activist. Interesting, Jordan going there when he didn't really do that as a player. He says he paved the way and set an example for every black player who came into the league after him, including me. The world has lost a legend. Let's start with our reaction here in studio with Christopher Gasper of the Boston Globe. What do you think his legacy is, or your lead thought hearing the news today?
My lead thought, Felger, would be, so often in sports we make comparisons. LeBron to Michael Jordan, Kobe to Michael Jordan, Brady to Joe Montana. Bill Russell was truly incomparable. There is no comparison for Bill Russell, and I think he stands alone. You look at, he revolutionized the NBA, the impact he had. Red Auerbach was a great coach. He said in the book, Tell Me a Story with John Feinstein, that every year he was with the Celtics, he tried to add a player that would make the team better. But he said the one guy who wasn't replaceable was Bill Russell. And Auerbach took over in 1950. They didn't even make the finals. They didn't even make the finals until Russell showed up in 56. And then they win the championship in 7. Obviously, Tommy Heinsohn was there as well, our friend, the late, great Tommy Heinsohn. But Russell was the heart of that Celtics dynasty.
All right, let's bring in Dan Shaughnessy. He joins us on vacation. Thank you for doing so, Dan. We do appreciate it. Where would you start with this news today?
Well, it's a huge day in Boston sports. I mean, I lived this when I was a child. The Celtics won the championship every spring. It was just a rite of passage. And there's no question he's the greatest winner. You go to your Rushmore thing you were talking about earlier. I know Tom Brady, football is more popular in this century than basketball was then. And I know there's more teams now, and the playoff thing is harder. But 11 championships in 13 years, on top of the San Francisco years, the Olympic episode. This guy is the greatest winner in the history of North American sports, the first black coach in the history of North American sports. He's got to be at the top. I mean, you just can't top that. Anytime there was a seventh game, he won it. He didn't need to have the rock, have the touches. He could control the game with defense, with rebounds, running the floor, and making everybody else better. It's an epic story. We were all better for having him in our midst. And as you referenced, also a great justice, social warrior, just a guy who was all over all aspects of it, and a great intellect. He was even a better writer than we were. We hated that, but he was.
All right, I want to get to the off-court part coming up in a second. But, to me as a sports fan, what I value more than anything is the winning. I love the winning stats. I love the guys that win. I prefer the guys that win championships over the guys that win MVPs. Big thing of how I follow sports. And there's all these great stats with Russell, but Ryan always talks about he had 21 games where it was a winner-take-all game, yes. Whether it was college, Olympics, or in the NBA. He was 21-0.
That's incredible.
In those games, okay? And the other one is that between the University of San Francisco, the Olympics, and the NBA, there was a span there is 16 years. He played 16 years in between all those things and won a championship or a gold medal in 14 of those 16 years. So those are winning stats, Chris. I'll start with you. That will never be matched.
No, absolutely not. And that's really a big part of his legacy as a professional athlete. Dan touched on him. He's the greatest winner in the history of North American team sports. And that's why I say he's incomparable. There's no other athlete in American sports culture or life that affected or impacted winning to the degree of Bill Russell. And that was in part why when Red Auerbach stepped down that he made Bill Russell the coach, because it was who's going to coach Bill Russell other than Bill Russell? And he was a great winner as a coach as well. And that's ultimately the legacy. I think for the younger generation, if you go back and look at some of the stats, even though he was a 5-time NBA MVP, won all these rebounding titles, he never averaged 17 shots a game, guys. The most he ever averaged was about 16.5, 16.6. And he still impacted winning like nobody else. And that's why I say, again, and there's never been anybody like him, and there never will be anybody like him that we'll ever see.
So Dan watched it. Most of us who talk about it only read about it or see the clip. You tell me, Dan, why was he such a winner? What specifically?
Well, let's go to the fact that he had an arch rival, Wilt Chamberlain. The guy averaged 50 points a game, was more of a physical specimen than he was. And yet, whenever Russell went up against Chamberlain, invariably he came out on top, to the point the last year when he's player coach, he beats a team with Chamberlain, West, Baylor. Celtics have an old team, a squad that finished 4th in their division that year. They win the NBA championship. It just never stopped. You always felt watching him, he would prevail. He found a way to prevail. The stories are legend. They're epic. And yeah, you really can't do better than this. He's it.
Okay, let's start with the story, or get to the story of Russell and the city. It's a complicated story. It's not always a very positive story, Chris.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that story today?
I mean, I think, later in life, certainly the city embraced him and appreciated him. But let's be honest, when he was here, they did not. Not the way he should have been, not for a city that values championships and winning, ultimately. They sort of felt like he stepped out of his place when he was off the court as a black man in America. And that's why he wrote in his autobiography, he called Boston a flea market of racism. And he wasn't wrong. And I know a lot of people sort of resented that. But when he was here, we all know the story about people defecating on his bed in Reading and putting the N-word on the walls of his home. And honestly, I'll tell you, for most of his life, for whatever reason, I never felt like he was embraced or was somebody who was beloved as much as Ted Williams, Bobby Orr, Larry Bird, even Tom Brady. I think towards the end, when the statue finally went up and he gave the all clear for that, when he gets the presidential medal from President Obama, I think things changed towards the end of his life. And Dan can talk about this. Do you realize that when Bill Russell had his number retired, nobody was in the arena, and he wanted it that way? He didn't want to have any sort of celebration with the fans here. And one other thing I'll add, when his daughter Karen went to Harvard, he was nervous about her going to school at Harvard based on his experience in this area. So he knows Harvard. This is a very intelligent man. He knows Harvard is the best school around. He still had some trepidation about his daughter going to Harvard because of his own experience in this area.
Well, so that's sort of my question, Dan. I know, the number ultimately went up in '99 and the statue was made, and it felt like amends were made. But do you think in his heart of hearts he ever truly forgave Boston?
No, and I don't blame him. Everything Chris just referenced, that stuff doesn't go away. There was always a force field. There were times you didn't want to approach him. He blew hot and cold when he would come back here, but it was never totally great, and we understand why. And something else? That statue, as great as it is, it needs to be more prominently placed. It should be in front of the State House, somewhere where people see it on a regular basis, like the Bobby Orr statue at the Garden, like the Ted Williams statue outside Fenway Park, and the Brady statue eventually be at Gillette. We got to have that thing more. You can't find that thing. Not enough people have seen it. They should relocate that thing, starting now.
I mean, not that this is really my purview usually, but don't they have to name something? If we have a Ted Williams tunnel.
You would think so.
If we have an Ortiz Way or whatever around Fenway Park, I mean, what's Causeway Street? Should it be There's no Causeway there anymore. I mean, something has to happen like that. Wouldn't you say, Chris? I'll give you the final word.
But would he want that? Remember, again, he resisted that. He was very much about, we're not going to just cover this over with the statue. What happened to me happened here, and I want people to know about it, and we're not just going to pretend that it didn't. So the statue is great, and he was ultimately okay with that at the end of the day. But I don't even know if he'd want something to be named after him at this point, based on the experience here. He was very much about sort of telling the real story of what it was like here when he played here.
Okay. Well, much more on this on NBC Sports Boston, over on the NBC Sports Boston side, and they'll come up tomorrow at 8 p.m., a special look back on Bill Russell's life. Wick Grossbeck, Steve Paliuca, Brad Stevens, Jackie McMullen, many others will join Michael Holley to add their perspective about Russell's incredible legacy. Remembering Bill Russell, 8 p.m. tomorrow on NBC Sports Boston.